Welcome to On the Vineyard, a 10-minute weekly wrap-up of news from the Vineyard Gazette Media Group on Martha's Vineyard. I'm publisher Monica Brady-Myrov. We're so glad you're here. On the Vineyard is sponsored by Martha's Vineyard Bank. Last week, there was a graduation at the Martha's Vineyard Regional High School, not of the senior class, but for the class of adult English learners who are part of the Martha's Vineyard Adult Learning Program. Superintendent Richie Smith welcomed the students with a little Portuguese. More than 100 students and their families, mostly Brazilians, gathered in the auditorium and walked across the stage to get their certificates of completion. These students spent the last 6 months attending 2.5 hours of class 3 nights a week at the high school to learn English. Program Director Claudio Di Chiara says they should feel proud.
I want to say that how impressed I am by your efforts, your steadfastness, and your results.
And Cuddy Hunk wants to get golf carts under control.
A few people are driving a little recklessly. There are reports of drunk driving out there.
More on that story in a moment. Tuesdays in the Newsroom brought more than 30 people to the Gazette newsroom to hear from all 6 librarians on the island. They included Rosa Parker of the Aquinnah Library, the smallest on the island, Amy Ryan of Vineyard Haven, which is soon to reopen after remodeling, Lisa Sherman of Edgartown, which just celebrated 10 years in its new building, Alexandra Pratt of West Tisbury, Ruth Konigsberg of Chilmark, and Allison Malik of Oak Bluffs. Alexandra of West Tisbury shared that cleaning up after a goat is part of her job.
And there was a goat for goat story time. And I was following a goat behind. It was a dustpan and broom. And he'd clean up as his little tail lifted. And I was like, I'm getting my master's. And
I love libraries and learned a lot about some services I didn't know they had, such as digital subscriptions to the New York Times and Boston Globe and many other websites, says Ruth from the Chilmark Library.
A lot of the libraries also have subscriptions to Ancestry.com, and it's great. You can consumer reports if you're looking to buy a new car. You know, these are fairly expensive subscriptions that we are making free to the public.
And you can check out a variety of different things: a microscope, a sewing machine, an accordion, and clam rakes, which I checked out twice last fall when I went digging for quahogs. Also, did you know all the libraries on Martha's Vineyard don't collect fines for late library books? There's a full article about all they do in the Gazette this week. That's the sound of the historic press in the Vineyard Gazette offices in Edgartown printing the paper. That means it's time to go upstairs to the newsroom and check in with Bill Evell, the editor-in-chief, and the reporters on this week's news.
Hello. Town meeting season is upon us once again. Next week on April 14, West Tisbury, Edgartown, and Oak Bluffs voters have their town meetings. The following week, Tisbury and Chilmark step up to the plate, and in May, it is Aquinnah's turn. There are also town elections starting next week in West Tisbury, Edgartown, and Oak Bluffs, the other ones following in later weeks. We thought we'd focus today on Oak Bluffs, which has over 80 articles on its warrant, and probably the biggest one to be talked about will be the potential taking of the Island Theater by the town, taking it by eminent domain from the Hall family. Turning now to Emma Kilbride, who is on the story on the Oak Bluffs warrant and in this particular situation. Emma?
Thank you, Bill. So, a few months ago, back in February, the Select Board first discussed the potential of either purchasing or taking by eminent domain the Island Theater, which has sat vacant at the top of Circuit Ave since 2012. And at town meeting next week, they will be asking taxpayers to potentially foot a $5 million bill for the taking of that property.
Yeah, and this is the first step, right, in the process. It doesn't mean immediately suddenly they get the money and they take it. It's like, will voters approve this? And then all the legal stuff will have to go back and forth, I imagine.
Exactly. So, like I said, both a purchase and an eminent domain taking are on the table here, and so it's really going to be a matter for the town of deciding what to do once this article passes.
All right, so it's the first step. What are some other big articles coming up in Oak Bluffs?
Well, there is a $1.9 million general override.
Which
means
a lot of towns are facing overrides this year. That's the big unifying factor.
Exactly. A lot of towns on the island and a lot of towns across Massachusetts, because things are getting so much more expensive and towns are having trouble keeping up with the maximum 2.5% threshold by which they're able to raise property taxes every year.
Yeah, anything above that, the voters have to come together and vote yes or no to the override.
Exactly.
And if they vote no, cuts start to take place, right?
Exactly. And it's impossible to say right now what will happen if the override doesn't pass, but I imagine that cuts will need to be made, and Town Administrator Deb Potter has alluded to that in the past.
Yeah. And so what are some of the big ticket items that we're looking at?
So, including the Island Theater article, there are 3 debt exclusions, which is kind of like an override, except how a debt exclusion works is that once the debt is paid off for a capital purchase, taxes go back down. So 2 of those that are on the warrant next week are upgrades to the Dukes County Ave pump station, which helps the town manage its wastewater. The town is asking for $1 million for that, and also got $1.5 million previously, but things have skyrocketed in terms of price, so the town has reevaluated. And another debt exclusion is asking for $825,000 to fund the design for the Lagoon Pond watershed sewer extension, which is ultimately aiming to mitigate the pond's nitrogen load.
All right. Now, and those are just a couple of the big ticket items. Check out Emma's story, which really unpacks a lot more of the articles on the warrant. But, of course, the warrant itself is really the primer on all of the different articles, so make sure you check out that. The town meeting starts at 7 o'clock on Tuesday, April 14th at the Performing Arts Center. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you, Bill, and go to town meeting.
Turning now to Ethan Genter, who this week was on the Lucky Island beat. 2 lotto hits, one for $15 million and one for $1 million, took place in the last week and a half. Ethan?
That's right, Bill. There was tickets sold over at the VFW for $15 million. That was claimed by a Vineyard Haven-based trust. And then another one just on Wednesday was sold and cashed in at Woodland Grill. That one was for $1 million. Both folks took the lump sum one-time payment, so it's a little less than the full amount, but still big for those folks. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, incredible. All right, we're going to now leave the island and take a little trip over to Cutty Hunk. Ethan was on a story this week about sort of rampant use of golf carts there, and they're kind of trying to maybe cut down on this.
Yeah, for anyone who's been over to Cutty Hunk, they don't have a ferry like us. They don't bring cars over. Cars are very secondary uses over there, really only for hauling like freight and things like that. Golf carts are the pervasive vehicle out there. Just about every one of the 190 homes have golf carts. Some people have 2. Some of the inns have multiple, and there are even rental agencies out there.
And now they've become a bit of the villain, eh?
I don't know if it's that bad, but
it's fun to paint them as a villain.
What people have noticed recently, I talked to several town officials and different folks out there, and they said, you know, there's a few more on the road, and a few people are driving a little recklessly. There are reports of drunk driving out there on the golf carts, and it's just getting a little too much for folks.
So they're there, but they're not really street legal, so then therefore you can't enforce regulations on them. It's sort of a catch-22.
For anyone who's been to Cutty Hunk, it's very old-timey. A lot of people walk everywhere. It's a square mile. So golf carts are the perfect vehicle for out there. No one really needs a car, but like you said, they're technically not really allowed. State police don't really go out there to look at people driving on the roads. The state has no real mechanism for you to regulate how or to pull people over for speeding on vehicles because you're not supposed to have them on the road in the first place.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Ethan. It was kind of fun to check it out. You know, as you look at the world headlines and there's so many awful problems out there, to just read a story about golf carts, I found that soothing. Thank you.
Anytime, Bill.
You can read more on these stories and all the news for free at vineyardgazette.com. There's a spring cookie decorating event at the Oak Bluffs Library on Saturday. What did I tell you about all the cool things libraries do? And some favorite island restaurants have opened back up, including State Road and Beach Road. And according to our newsletter, Cook the Vineyard, Red Cat Kitchen in Oak Bluffs has announced they'll have entire menus for people who have alpha-gal, the allergy to red meat that can be caused by the bite of a Lone Star tick. And there are lots of rocks on Martha's Vineyard, you've probably noticed. The late horticulturalist Polly Hill explains why.
These rocks are all, should I say, native. They were here. They're granite, and they rolled down from the mountain behind us when Martha's Vineyard was formed, when the glaciers retreated and left this island sitting here.
This interview was conducted in 2001 by Lindsay Lee for the Martha's Vineyard Museum. Polly Hill died in 2001 at the age of 100. Our theme music is from island composer and musician Michael Hayden. If you like the show, please follow us so you won't miss an episode, and tell a friend who loves the Vineyard. Thanks to our sponsor, Martha's Vineyard Bank, committed to supporting the Martha's Vineyard and Falmouth communities through their charitable foundation and local partnerships. They gave $250,000 to the YMCA of Cape Cod to help them build a new facility in Falmouth. Martha's Vineyard Bank. Your goals, our guidance, mvbank.com. I'm Monica Brady-Myrov. Thanks for joining us on The Vineyard. Talk to you next week.